Good morning, students. Yesterday we had started the chapter in political science, the first chapter that is power sharing, and we are looking at two test cases in this chapter. One happens to be Belgium, the other one happens to be Sri Lanka. And we would see in this chapter that how these two different societies, located and situated in both different corners of the planet, that is, Belgium is right in the northern part of the world, and the Sri Lankan society being right at the southern tip. And we see here how they have been successful and how they have not been successful in bridging the gap between very, very diverse communities which live within their geographies. Okay, now we have seen the Belgium problem, that is, whereby a great deal of and the people who live in the capital of Belgium, that is Brussels, they speak French because of historical reasons, and very few of them speak the local language, which happens to be Dutch. And compared to the other areas of Belgium, that is in the other areas, naturally most of those people speak Dutch, and very few speak French. But the capital, the problem with capital is because capital is the place where most of the decisions are being made. It's the place which decides the trends, the political trends, the social trends, the cultural trends, and that area is heavily influenced by the French. So there been a problem, and there was a problem, but they have managed to really work out the differences, work out with a different set of sets and methodologies. And in Sri Lanka, yes, it was not as smooth, and we would see the reason why. Now, students, you have to understand, though Sri Lanka happens to be, looks like, at least on the world map, a tiny island located somewhere in the Indian Ocean, the southern tip of it, that is. But you have to understand, in the problem in Sri Lanka was more because of the ethnic diversity of the people there. You had, as we had seen yesterday, you had Sri Lankan Tamils, then you had Indian Tamils, then you had Sinhalese, who were the original inhabitants of Sri Lanka, of course. Then you had the Christians, then you have Muslims, then of course the Buddhists. It's too much of a diversity for a small geography like Sri Lanka. That's what I would like to say in short. So let us come to the topic today: majoritarianism in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka emerged as an independent country in 1948. The leaders of the Sinhala community sought to secure dominance over government by virtue of their majority. And as a result, the democratically elected government adopted a series of majoritarian measures to establish Sinhala supremacy. In 1956, an act was passed to recognize Sinhala as the only official language, thus disregarding Tamil. The governments followed preferential policies that favored Sinhala applicants for university positions and government jobs. A new constitution stipulated that the state shall protect and foster Buddhism. All these governments' measures, coming one after the other, gradually increased the feeling of alienation among the Sri Lankan Tamils. They felt that none of the major political parties led by Buddhist Sinhala leaders was sensitive to their language and culture. They felt that the constitution and government policies denied them equal political rights, discriminated against them in getting jobs and other opportunities, and ignored their interests. Now, students, there's something very interesting, or rather not interesting, about Sri Lanka. You have to understand, students. Now, Sri Lanka, we have great amount of similarities with the Sri Lankan society. That is, at least southern India has a great amount of similarity with the. Definitely, I'm not talking about northern part of it, northern part of India. That is, but you have to understand that, students. India also is a land of an enormous amount of diversity, much more diversity than any country on the planet. Forget about Sri Lanka. But we still have managed to stay along for hundreds and thousands of years, of course. But even after independence, once, yes, we did have the partition whereby there was a different land, East Pakistan and West Pakistan was formed. But at the same time, you still had millions of Muslims who still were left in India. right? And so we have been able to, over the last 75 years, we have been able to work out with this diversity. That is the first reason, and one and very important reason. When we came with the Constitution of India after independence, our Constitution did not favor any community or caste or any group of people at all. It was a completely impartial constitution. It gave equal rights to all sections of society. It did not have any discrimination at all. The framers of the constitution did not have this in the corner of their mind, that yes, we have to favor certain sections of the society, or Hindus had been more participating in the freedom struggle of India, so naturally let us give them more political leverage, let us give them more power. So all that was definitely not in the minds of the people who were framing our constitution after our independence. So it was that yes, it would be the same laws for all the sections of the people and the society. Right. So now, but why is that this difference? Whereby after independence, when Sri Lanka got independence, their majority community, which was the Sinhala community, they wanted everything for themselves. By they wanted everything to be dominated by Sinhala community. They did not want to leave anything out for the Tamils, whether the Indian Tamils or the Sri Lankan Tamils or the Muslims, not at all, or the Christians. They wanted everything for the Sinhala community only. Now, why was this? Why do you think it happened? Now, you'll have to, before we start kind of going about, though it is not there in this chapter, but I think it is very important that before we get into the majoritarianism and we straight away jump to the point that yes, Sinhalas wanted an absolute majority for themselves, so you'll have to work out and try and understand as to what is the pretext for it. Students in India, in spite of the enormous diversity, you will have to understand that every segment of Indian population, right from Manipur to Nagaland to Rajasthan, and even that is today's Pakistan, which there was none when India was fighting its freedom struggle against the British. They all fought unitedly. Of course, it was another matter that in certain agitations, some sections of population participated in certain agitation and certain mass movements. Certain other sections did not choose to participate. Of course, sometimes these differences of opinions were surely there. But at the same time, it cannot be denied that we fought the British as a united whole. You cannot say that one section of Indian population was forever in favor of the British ruling in India. No, you cannot say that. You cannot say that the Hindus were always against British and say the Muslims were always in favor of British, or the Sikhs were always in favor of British, or even the Christians were always in favor of British. No, sometimes it did happen. We did have differences of opinion, but it is bound to happen, students. If you have a freedom struggle, if you wage a freedom struggle, which is almost like 190 years old, of course, you cannot expect 100% cohesion and cooperation. Sometimes there are bound to be differences, but we fought together, and that is the reason, because we had shared so much of anxiety and pain and misery of the British and the oppression of the British. So once India became free and we came up with the constitution, this thing was never in our minds that yes, we would give preferential treatment to certain sections of the society. This was not this was not the case in Sri Lanka. You have to understand, friends, if you Sri Lanka did not have such tall leaders, or rather leadership like India had. Like Mahatma Gandhi and Sardar Patel and Nehru and Malana Azad Sahib. If Sri Lanka did not have those kind of leadership with so much of stature. They didn't have it. That's the first thing. And the other thing, a very important thing is Sri Lankan freedom fighters took a great deal of inspiration from whatever was happening in India. Okay, it is very interesting to know. Of course, no one talks about it anymore these days. That Mahatma Gandhi had visited Sri Lanka in 1927. I think yes, in 1927, on the invitation of Sri Lankan freedom fighters, and he stayed in Sri Lanka for about a good 22, 23 days. Yes, and he gave many, many speeches around Sri Lanka and addressed different sections of Sri Lankan population, motivated them, about non-violence and waging a non-violence struggle and not picking up arms against the Britishers, because he again preached the merits of satyagraha even in Sri Lanka. Okay, so you have to understand that there has to be a reason why Sri Lankan freedom fighters, even there were asking for Mahatma Gandhi to come and motivate them and invigorate them and then really show them the path. So you have to understand, students, that they did not have such tall leaders. That is leadership. That is the first thing. And the second very important thing is they did not have such great mass movements where every section of the Sri Lankan population participated, like we had non-cooperation movement, and then we had salt satyagraha and a civil disobedience movement, and then you had the incidents like Jallianwala Bagh and then hanging of Bhagat Singh, and these were the incidents which really polarized the whole Indian population. No one thought that yes, Tilak was fighting for the freedom of Maharashtra, and Bhagat Singh was fighting for the freedom of Punjab. And so when Sardar Bhagat Singh was hanged, only the Sikhs were sad about it. No, the whole nation wept, right? So India had such great mass struggles and mass movements, but Sri Lanka did not. In fact, very few countries around the planet have that. We were very fortunate to have that, and that is the reason why, in spite of enormous amount of diversity, you still see that people, in spite of so much of diversity and differences, they still kind of manage to get along. So that was one of the reasons. So when Sri Lanka became independent, it was not because it had waged a great battle of independence against the British. Honestly, of course, there were freedom fighters like Korea and yeah, Bandar Naike. These were some prominent names, of course, of Sri Lankan freedom struggle, but they did not have the kind of cohesion, and they did not wage such a battle like we did over 190 years, right from 1757 to then the 1857 uprising, Jhansi Ki Rani, Tatya Tope, and all of them. And then you had people like Tipu Sultan, Hyder Ali, all these people waging a concerted and a united battle against the Britishers. And finally, we saw independence and victory after 190 years. But Sri Lanka did not have that kind of thing. Sri Lanka, before the British started ruling in Sri Lanka, it was in the hand of Portuguese. So Sri Lanka, British vacated Sri Lanka. In fact, after a year after they left India, India was left by British. That is in 1947, of course. But the British left Sri Lanka in 1948. I think it was February. That's about 7-8 months after they left India. Now, it was not that because Sri Lankans had been kind of really breathing down the neck of the British. No, British left Sri Lanka mainly because they had left India. They had left their most valuable possession that was Indian subcontinent, which included Bangladesh, Pakistan, and so many areas which they held. And once they left these territories and these massive geographies, for them it made no sense to retain such a small island like Sri Lanka. So they just left it because they were leaving, so they left. We shall continue. Thank you.